Hey, welcome back to Clever Cat class. Are you ready to learn something all new and be a very clever cat? Me too. I want to talk about one of the most irritating creatures ever, but also kind of useful, ants. See, pretty much no matter where you live, ants are somewhere nearby. They live in the freezing north, the hot tropics, dry deserts, and wet jungles. Pretty much everywhere in between, too. And when I say live pretty much everywhere, I mean everywhere. Ants will nest in soil, trees, and cracks in city pavement, even in the walls of your house. And ants are serious survivors. They've lived on Earth for more than 100 million years, while lots of other animals have lost the contest for survival and died out. Ants just continue to thrive. See, ants are kind of curious because while they are insects, they're social insects, meaning they live in large groups called colonies. And those colonies, they are really highly organized and complex societies where every ant has a job. And when I say jobs, I mean a job. Some of the things ants do are truly amazing. Sometimes they grow their own food, or they'll tend to cattle insects, or even keep forced workers. And don't think that you don't have ants nearby. In fact, if you could gather all the ants on Earth, no matter how small they are, and weigh them, their combined weight would be equal to the combined weight of all the world's people. Or I guess that's at least what scientists are estimating. See, no one really knows how many ants there are on Earth. They do know there's about 4,500 different kinds of ants, or at least 4,500 kinds that have been discovered. Scientists actually think there's many more out there that haven't yet been identified. And with that many different kinds of ants, it's probably no surprise that there's a huge range. See, some are so small that they're really hard to see, and some are so big they're over an inch long. Large or small, though, you can recognize an ant. They all have 6 legs and 3 body parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And those body parts, they're covered with a hard shell or exoskeleton, and ants have no internal skeleton like you or I do. And perhaps the most curious thing about ants is the way that they breathe. Instead of breathing through their mouth like you and I, they actually breathe through small holes called spiracles that are located in their thorax and abdomen. Ants also have 2 long antennae attached to their head, and these antennae are really important. They're the ants' main way of getting information about the world. See, ants wave those antennae in the air and tap them on the ground or even touch objects with them, and the antenna picks up scents and tastes, as well as information about temperature, moisture, and even the texture of things. That's not all, though. The antenna helps the ant find its way places, locate food sources, and even communicate with other ants through scent signals. And it's actually a good thing those antennae are so useful because ants don't have very good eyesight. Some are actually blind or nearly blind, and all have primitive eyes that can detect little more than light and dark. Although, to be fair, it should be pointed out there are a few that have large compound eyes, like yours, that send multiple images to the ant's very tiny brain. Ants also have interesting jaws. See, they're used for more than chewing food. In fact, ants actually have 2 sets of jaws. The outer jaws are called mandibles, and they're really powerful, and they have sharp edges, and ants use them for digging, biting, carving, cutting, and even holding food. And what's really interesting about those jaws is, for all their power, the ants can also use them really gently, because that's how they move their young within the nest. Ants also have inner jaws that have fine combs that are used to clean their antennae and legs. See, ants clean their antennae constantly with these combs and with a set of brushes on their front legs. Ants also have tiny claws at the tip of their legs that help it crawl across all kinds of surfaces, even up to smooth walls. See, those claws grab crevices and bumps that are too small for you and I to see, and that's why ants sometimes seem to defy gravity by walking straight up a wall or upside down on the ceiling. Oh, yeah, and at some stages of their life, some ants actually have wings, too. Those wings attach to their thorax, but they don't always have them. Ants also have 2 of something else that's kind of weird. They have 2 stomachs. Those stomachs are just behind a narrow waist that's behind their thorax, and they're actually one of the things that sets ants apart from similar insects like termites. The first stomach is used to digest food, and the other stomach is to hold food in liquid form. See, an ant uses its second stomach or crop to carry food back to the colony where it feeds the other ants. See, and that just goes to prove ants are really adaptable, and that's one of the reasons that ants have been able to survive for millions of years. They're able to adapt to all sorts of conditions. Now, while different types of ants look alike and they all live in colonies, they vary greatly in what they eat, how they get their food, and where and how they nest. See, ants are sometimes developed into different groups based on these lifestyle tendencies and the climates where they choose to live. Sometimes those groups actually relate back to some of those jobs I talked about earlier. Believe it or not, some ants actually raise their own cattle. And it's not cattle like humans think of cattle. They actually are ants that collect honeydew, which is a sweet substance made by tiny insects called aphids that you'll often find living on your roses. See, honeydew is a really good food for ant colonies, and so to make sure that they have enough, they will actually tend herds of aphids like humans do milk cows. These ants will set out and capture a group of aphids and put them out to pasture on plant stems. The aphids will suck the plant juices and create honeydew. Then the ants collect the honeydew. Now, even more curious than simply collecting the honeydew, in cold places, ants have been known to take aphid eggs into their nest to keep them safe throughout the winter, and some even shelter the aphids inside the ant hive overnight. As if this wasn't enough, there are certain kinds of ants, yellow-brown honey ants, that actually store honeydew inside their body. Humans call these living containers honeydews. See, the ants are fed honeydew until their abdomens are so swollen that they can't even walk, and then other ants in the colony get a meal by tapping on the honeypot ant. In Mexico, people consider these ants actually a food. There's also harvester ants who survive by setting aside large stockpiles of seeds and grains. See, they collect the seeds and strip off their husks, and they'll store them underground. And then there's ants that raid other ant mounds for workers. See, they're the large red ants that we often find in the western United States. They'll raid the nest of black ants and steal their young and carry them back to their own nest and raise them. When these kidnapped ants are all grown up, they'll gather food and feed the red ants, also known as Amazons. And believe it or not, ants can be carpenters. Carpenter ants actually nest in wood. They use their powerful jaws to carve out tunnels and chambers in a likely piece of wood. Now, don't be confused. Carpenter ants don't actually eat wood. They eat more normal fare like other insects, rotting fruit, and plant material. What they do is nest in the wood, and there's lots of kind of ants that are actually hunters. They prey on other insects. The most dangerous hunters are army ants. They're from the tropical regions. Army ants are meat-eating ants that travel in huge columns. They swarm over the ground, devouring insects, spiders, beetles, snakes, lizards, even small birds, pretty much anything meat-wise that gets in their path. A little less gross are leafcutter ants. Leafcutters live in Central and South America, and they actually farm their own food. See, the ants will carry pieces of leaves to their nest and chew them up and store them underground. Eventually, a fungus will grow on those leaf materials and provide food for the entire colony. Besides jobs, there's other important things about a colony. See, no matter how big a colony is or where it is, it revolves around one single ant. The queen ant. See, the queen ant's pretty important because other than in very rare instances, she's the only member of an ant colony that can lay eggs and create new ants. What that means is pretty much everything that an ant colony does is centered around taking care of the ant queen. It's no surprise, I guess, then, that while the average lifespan for an ant is 10 years, queens have been known to live for as long as 20 years, but no ant can live long alone. Every single ant in a colony depends on all the other members of their colony to survive. That's why ants are known as some of the most social and cooperative insects in the natural world. See, people often compare ant society to human society because an ant colony really is a model of cooperation. Every single member works for the good of the whole colony. Now, it is kind of important to point out that ants don't sit around and think about other ants all the time. They actually act on instinct. That means they're just programmed to do the things that they do. All the same, ants are really fascinating creatures, and if you get the chance, you should observe some in nature or even build your very own ant farm. Thank you so much for learning with me today. We're really getting quite clever, aren't we? Now it's time for you to check your schedule, and I will see you in your next class.